990 entry into the Utah Broadcasters Association Hall of Fame is Roy B. Gibson, pioneer broadcast journalist, communication professor, and community leader. Roy would be here with us today to accept this prestigious honor were it not for his untimely death on September 30th, 1989. On that date, and in the days that followed, broadcast colleagues and communication students paid tribute to the extraordinary life of Roy Gibson. Within these broadcast reports is the resounding rationale for Roy's induction to the UBA Broadcast Hall of Fame. These reports speak for themselves.
Presenting Roy Gibson and the news, a last-minute roundup of local and regional news of the West.
Tonight, Ogden City Police have taken a wider search area tonight to find the bandit who robbed an Ogden Savings and Loan Company early this morning.
Orrin Hatch went to a fundraiser in St. George and told his listeners the Democratic Party was the party of homosexuals. He later denied it until a radio station confronted him with a tape of his remarks. Then he decided...
Project 2000, Salt Lake, City on the Edge, a town meeting and panel discussion. We're here in the Salt Lake City.
Started a program toward what it calls medical self-help with a conference on Capitol Hill today. Governor George D. Clyde says the program is designed to take any family in an emergency situation and make them independent and able to care for
this. Avoid the Don Rickles style of insult and debasement. Choose instead the Jack Benny style that says, I'm not...
This panel discussion on City on the Edge.
That's Wednesday's news at 6.
Roy Gibson and the news was brought to you by Conoco, the hottest brand going. Be with us tomorrow.
Salt Lake's newest and perhaps the most modernistic building in town.
Roy started his career in 1952 at station KTVT, which became KCPX, and finally KTVX. Along with Paul James and Bob Welty, Roy anchored the news and eventually became news director. Today, Bob Welty recalled his old friend.
Roy was a wonderful guy. He was a fine journalist. He was highly principled. In fact, the thing I think I remember most about Roy was how highly principled he was. It was, to him, it was either black or white, good or bad. And if it was bad, he didn't want to have anything to do with it.
When journalism was bad, Roy got after those of us in the news media. As Channel 2's media man, Roy always called it as he saw it.
But the media will look for offbeat and striking statements, and when they find them, publish them. News, after all, is not the usual, but the unusual.
Roy Gibson was an associate professor of communications at the University of Utah and was teaching classes this quarter. KSL-TV Vice President and News Director Spence Kennard summed up all of our feelings today with this statement. Roy Gibson was one of the pioneer broadcast journalists in this area who helped set the standards we use today. We are all better today because of his work and dedication as a journalist, an educator, and a friend. We will miss him.
Presenting Roy Gibson and the news.
The gravelly voice and commanding presence greeted viewers of Channel 4 for nearly 20 years. Gibson, who had studied drama in college, not only reported and anchored the news, he also ran the news department from 1957 to 1959. And for more than 10 years, Gibson teamed up with weatherman Bob Welty and sportscaster Paul James on the most widely watched broadcast in Utah.
Roy was the very best. He was a top journalist. But more than that, he was just a good guy, an extremely high-principled guy. He just wouldn't say anything or do anything that wasn't right.
In 1971, Gibson began a new career, teaching journalism at the University of Utah. But as KUTV's independent news critic, the media man, he kept viewers informed about the best and worst of the news and the people who reported it.
It was less than tactful, so he spent a lot of time denying any abusive intent.
Gibson held a number of prestigious journalism and education awards. His sudden death brought shock and sadness.
He looked so healthy and strong, and maybe it was just his strong personality, but he always, to me, seemed like a sort of a pillar of strength. And it's a shock. It's a shock to see him go so early.
Gibson's legacy includes a generation of journalism students who remember him as a perfectionist, a stickler for following Gibson's rules.
He was just one of those good, solid people you like being around.
Many University of Utah faculty and students were hit hard by the unexpected death of media man Roy Gibson.
Gibson was well known for his contributions to the communication department and the news media. I'm Scott Hall.
And I'm Laura Steele. Join us for a look at Roy Gibson's life and the effects of his death at the U, next on Newsbreak.
This is Newsbreak.
Long before Roy Gibson became a reporter or professor, he had another life. Newsbreak reporter John Rennick has the story of Gibson's time as an actor.
Roy Gibson marveled and informed thousands of people while working here at Social Hall Avenue. But while here, he was also here, delighting theatergoers with his performances on stage. Kingsbury Hall director Paul Cragcroft was one of those theatergoers and a close personal friend of the late professor.
There wasn't anything Roy couldn't do in the way of acting, and I think sometimes in all of the to-do about his recent death that it was overlooked, at least for a while in the early days, that he'd had some connection with the theater, and everything focused on his news ability. Because
Cragcroft also feels that Gibson's theatrical experience benefited him in his broadcast career. This is John Rennick for Newsbreak.
Each Newsbreak telecast, past and future, is a tribute to Professor Roy Gibson. Reporter Wendy Lee explains.
Newsbreak, the university's student-operated telecast, first broadcasted 17 years ago under the direction of Professor Roy Gibson. Paul Rose, Newsbreak's technical supervisor, says without Roy, the show's future will be strongly affected.
Certainly, Newsbreak and the program will feel the loss from, such a great instructor. Roy was in on the beginning of the founding of Newsbreak, and all these years he has been, an impetus behind it.
Past Newsbreak reporter Sandy Rowan says Professor Gibson was stringent yet motivating.
Because Roy Gibson was such a perfectionist, and he instilled that perfectionism into me, and I appreciated the time that I worked with him.
Newsbreak's future is uncertain, but the direction and contribution of Roy Gibson will always be remembered. For Newsbreak, this is Wendy Lee.
Faculty members will especially miss Roy. Communication professor Dennis Alexander has managed to temporarily distribute Roy's jobs among others in the department.
Well, the first and most important thing we had to do was find an instructor for the radio news reporting class, and then to think about TV writing for next quarter. Maggie Sinclair from Channel 5 is going to do both of those for us, and in fact, she's a past student of Roy's and had worked at KUER, so we're just absolutely delighted to have her.
Internships were another concern for approximately 100 students. The program's now being directed by Professor Drexel.
Realistically, it's probably going to take 2 people to fill Professor Gibson's place.
Professor Roy Gibson not only gave of his knowledge to students, he also gave much of his time. He inspired students with his values and ideas about accuracy and ethics in journalism. Gibson spent much of his time here at Kingsbury Hall, the home of FM radio station KUER. For many years, Gibson and his students produced programs like Sunday Journal. As the program's executive producer, he was able to give students a chance to experience the real-life pressures of broadcast journalism.
The communication department doesn't really have a broadcast production setup. Working here at KUER gives them the opportunity to come down and really do it for real, under deadline, and if you miss it, you get yelled at and all of that sort of thing.
During the past few years, students were able to learn about the inner workings of the broadcast media. Without Roy, some people wondered if Sunday Journal would continue. Larry Holt assures us that it and student involvement on the air at will continue on the air at KUER.
Communication students, after recovering from the initial shock and sorrow of Gibson's death, are beginning to worry about their futures.
I just think that, trying to explain to a new counselor everything you've done throughout your 4 years here will be kind of difficult. I never did ask him for a letter of recommendation, but it's odd to think that, I had in my plan or go talk to Roy on Monday about a letter of recommendation.
But I was looking forward to some guidance about a career after graduation and have any suggestions from him because he was used to the business world in Salt Lake and the broadcast world here. I think out of this department, he is probably the one person who could teach broadcast and radio to the students.
Professor Gibson left nearly 60 advisees, 18 of whom are graduating seniors.
Friends of Roy Gibson gathered at the Union Building to pay tribute to him at a memorial service. John Mason reports.
They came to say goodbye, but also to remember a friend who had touched their lives. Roy Gibson was devoted, so devoted that Newsbreak coordinator Dick Schaefer feels that it may have led to his demise.
He put so much into working with us that I think it had to take something out.
Roy was perhaps best noted for his criticism. Ted Wilson remembers.
Ted, I heard a clip from your debate with Merrill and Norm, and you were mushy and imprecise. And, you know, I thought I'd done a pretty good job.
The meeting ended with a toast to Roy Gibson, a man who lived his life with courage and grace.
This day, August 11th, 1990, we add our own toast to salute the outstanding accomplishments of Roy Gibson. And it seems fitting to pause for a moment of silence in honor of our friend, our colleague, and our teacher. Congratulations, Roy, and thank you for a life of leadership and service.
A bold bandit robbed an Ogden bank this morning, and Salt Lake County has taken another step toward its new Hall of Justice.
Presenting Roy Gibson and the News, a last-minute roundup of local and regional news of the West. Brought to you tonight by Conoco, the hottest brand going. Now here is Roy Gibson.
Tonight, Ogden City Police have taken a wider search area tonight to find the bandit who robbed an Ogden Savings and Loan Company early this morning of more than $2,000. Police said the bandit entered the Ogden Savings and Loan Association, the Federal Savings and Loan, about 9:30 in the morning. He approached the teller cage of Mrs. Cora Davis and handed her a note which read, "Give me your money and don't sound any alarm." Mrs. Davis said the man never displayed any kind of gun, but kept his hand in his pocket during the entire episode as though it had contained a gun. She said she gave the man more than $2,000, which he immediately shoved into his pocket, then casually walked away. 25 other employees of the company stood by, completely unaware that the robbery was taking place. Mrs. Davis told police she was counting the silver when the man approached and handed her a note. She said he offered him the silver, but he refused and asked for currency only. She described the bandit as very calm and cool. Utah's 1962 highway death toll jumped to 10 today following the deaths of 3 persons in just 2 days. 67-year-old Mrs. Martha Foote of Moab was killed this morning when the car in which she was riding slammed head-on into a semi-trailer and truck near Thistle. The victim's husband was hurt in the accident. 20-year-old Marine Private Bruce May of Ogden was killed last night when the car in which he was riding collided with another in Box Elder County. And yesterday, a Salt Lake woman died in southern Utah of injuries suffered 2 days earlier in an accident. Here in Salt Lake City, an Oregon truck driver and his relief driver escaped injury this afternoon when their truck was hit by a speeding passenger train. Police said the accident happened at 3400 West on 5th South. The truck driver, 40-year-old Andy Davidson, told officers he was southbound on 34th West, saw the train, but thought he could make it across the crossing in time. The train's engine struck the left rear corner of the trailer being pulled by the truck. The impact threw the trailer off the road, and it rolled upside down into a barrel pit. The trailer was empty at the time, according to police. The main unit of the truck was spun around sideways in the street but did not roll over. Mr. Davison told officers he thought the train was going about 60 miles an hour at the time of impact. The Union Pacific passenger train was westbound. There were no reports of injuries on board the train nor the truck, according to police reports tonight. Utah is initiating a new program to make people self-dependent for medical care. That story in 1 minute.
Big city traffic. Big city driving. Stop and go. Stop and go, go, go. Here is where your car needs the go of Conoco Premium Gasoline with TCP Plus added. The surge of power, the boost of power, Conoco power. Whether you're driving uptown, downtown, or out across the country, you can depend on Conoco Premium Gasoline for stop and go power and for maximum mileage. Laboratory tests and road tests show that Conoco Premium with TCP Plus can give your car up to 17 extra miles per tank full, up to 15% more power. Conoco, the distance brand. Conoco, the power brand. Conoco, the hottest brand going.
The state of Utah has started a program toward what it calls medical self-help with a conference on Capitol Hill today. Governor George D. Clyde says the program is designed to take any family in an emergency situation and make them independent and able to care for themselves. However, the governor warned that a threat exists.
Unfortunately, our excellence in devising new weapons of destruction, I'm afraid, have outstripped our ability to solve human problems and generate relationships which will enable people to live in peace as neighbors and friends and associates.
Dr. G.D. Carlisle Thompson of the Utah State Health Department has been appointed to head up this program. Dr. Thompson says the biggest problem he can foresee in the program is its implementation.
Well, as you know from what the governor said this morning, we hope to reach at least 300,000 Utahns with this program. This will be a matter of several years, but at first we have already stimulated organizing committees in 9 Utah counties where the initial kits are being made available.
The Salt Lake County Commission today approved the expenditure of almost $700,000 to purchase property directly east of the current city and county building. Lewis M. Haney, the coordinator of the county's capital improvements program, made the request today to the commission. The land will be used as a site for several joint city and county public buildings. Mr. Haney explained that there are still 11 remaining properties in the block directly east of the city and county building, which must be bought before construction of the joint facilities can begin. Salt Lake City has asked the county to purchase the 11 properties with county funds. The city will repay its share of the cost when the city has funds available through the sale of bonds in March. The commission directed Mr. Haney, through the county finance commissioner, Edwin Q. Cannon, to send letters to property owners. The commission said 2 separate estimates of the values of the 11 remaining properties have been made, and the commission will offer the average of those 2 estimates. If no agreement in purchase price can be reached, the building coordinator will be asked by the county attorney's office to begin condemnation proceedings on the properties. The remaining sections of the property include a meat packing plant, a tavern, a service station, several offices, and several residences, plus a small grocery store. The Salt Lake City Commission today approved an ordinance, an amendment to an ordinance to make operation of helicopters in Salt Lake City more flexible. The amendment will allow the pilots of helicopters to fly their craft at lower elevations over the city and take off and land at designated heliports. Commissioner L.C. Romney said the revised ordinances had become necessary because of the increased use of helicopters within the city limits. He said in future years, the rotor-winged helicopters will be used extensively by such institutions as hospitals, governmental agencies, and major industrial concerns. In the future, helicopters will be allowed to fly as low as 1,000 feet. Fixed wing planes will be required to maintain an elevation of 2,000 feet still. Some science students in Utah have been honored. That story in just 1 minute.
Conoco. Conoco gasoline. Conoco premium gasoline with TCP Plus. Conoco, the distance brand. Conoco, the power brand. Conoco, the hottest brand going.
3 young Salt Lake City science students have been listed among the most promising young high school scientists across the nation. East High School's Michael S. Foster was one of a trio of Salt Lakers listed by the 21st annual Westinghouse Science Talent Search. In all, 365 winners were announced. 52 of these represented the 10 western states. The other 2 Utah winners came from Highland High School. They are Woody Campbell and Bill Rich, both of Highland. Westinghouse spokesman said the winners represent only 10% of the qualifying entrants in the national competition. From this group of winners, 40 will be chosen for an all-expense-paid trip to Washington, D.C., where they'll contest for Westinghouse scholarships and awards that total more than $34,000. Judging the winners was based on individual science project reports and written examinations. More than 23,000 high school seniors entered the original competition. Salt Lake's newest and perhaps the most modernistic building in town was dedicated today. The International Business Machines building at 348 East South Temple has piqued the curiosity of many Salt Lakers over the past year since its construction started. The building was actually completed last October, but since that time, the company has been moving its facilities in, getting ready for today's dedication. Then at noon today, Governor George D. Clyde officially opened the facility to the public. Richard Bullen, formerly of Logan, Utah, now an executive with the company in New York, says his company's outlet in Salt Lake City has grown substantially because, he said, local business leaders have created a good climate here for business and industry. A Utah State prison inmate has complained to the U.S. District Court that he is being discriminated against by prison officials. The complaint was made to District Court Judge A. Sherman Christensen in a handwritten writ of habeas corpus submitted by inmate Coy Ringo of Abilene, Texas. In the legal complaint, Ringo has charged that prison warden John W. Turner has failed to provide medical care, sufficient food, and kept him confined in solitary confinement without proper heat or ventilation. That has been taken under advisement. That's Wednesday's news at 6.
Roy Gibson and the News was brought to you by Conoco, the hottest brand going. Be with us tomorrow when HFC brings you Roy Gibson and the News. See Evening Report following the weather on KCPX TV, Channel 4, your ABC station. Swift, makers of Swift's Premium Cold Cuts, presents the Swift's Premium Weathercast.
Sing out for Swift Premium, the 2 most trusted words in me.
And now with the latest 4-state forecast, direct from the United States Weather Bureau, here is your Swift's Premium Weatherman, Bob Welty.